Good evening, everyone. My name is John Brown. I'm the Dean of the School of Architecture, Planning and Landscape, and I'm welcoming you to the second of our big three events for Block Week. As for those of you that were here on Tuesday or our students, you know that we close the school down from our regular curriculum twice a year, once in the fall and once in the euphemistically called spring, but it's probably closer to winter. To enable our students to take electives where we bring in great thinkers, smart makers, and visionaries to basically give the students a break from the rest of us, to hear different voices, learn new things. And tonight's lecture is no exception. It's a real treat. I'm not going to steal Jason's thunder with the introduction, but I'm absolutely thrilled for tonight's presentation. I do want to start by acknowledging that I'm an uninvited guest on the lands of the traditional territory of the people of Treaty 7, and that we are privileged to be working and living and playing on this land that has been stewarded by these Indigenous peoples for many, many generations. The people of Treaty 7 includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising the Siksika, the Pitana, and Kainai First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation, the Stoney Nakoda, which includes the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney First Nations. And also that the city of Calgary is home to Métis Nation of Alberta District 5 and 6. We had a meeting this afternoon with a young faculty member who is Inuit and is a sessional instructor here. We're very pleased. It's our first instructor who is associated directly with the school that is Indigenous, and part of her role is to teach the undergraduate program. She's also working towards her registration, and at a firm downtown. And part of her appointment is also as a mentor for Indigenous students, and it's part of our path towards reconciliation to provide that kind of opportunity to decolonize our curriculum, to provide Indigenous ways of knowing and making, opening up those knowledge of that to our non-Indigenous students, but also to our Indigenous students. And one of the things that was interesting about her comment about the debrief that we had over last term was that many of the Indigenous students that we have are also in the process of learning about their culture and learning about Indigenous ways. And that really struck me, that, and she said, you know, all I can talk about is my truth, being Inuit based, but I grew up in Northern Alberta, far from my family, and I'm just getting to know my own roots, and I can speak about my own lived experience and that of my family. But beyond that, I don't have the authority to really speak about it. And I thought that was also something that's interesting for us to think about as we go through this reconciliation process, that it isn't, indigeneity is not a big block, it's not a consolidating group, it's a very wide and extremely nuanced culture that is also in the process of regenerating while we're in the process of trying to reconcile. So it was quite a meaningful afternoon, and I wanted to share it with you today as we started this, so that the land acknowledgement is not just a kind of rote thing that we say. So there, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is the second of three events. On Friday, we have a big wrap-up party. You're all invited. There's no lecture. It's just lots of celebration of the student work. There are 10 courses being held right now, where just about every student in the architecture program is taking. We have the big three that we call them: the Taylor lectureship, the Gilmore lectureship, which we had presentations on Tuesday, and then today is the Sommerville. And so if you come on Friday, all of the work will be up, and the students and the critics will be eager to talk about it and to share their ideas. It's always one of the highlights of the year for me. So I mentioned the Sommerville lecture, which is the endowment that was created probably 20 years ago, that created the funding, ongoing and funding that allows us to do this. The Sommerville Visiting Lectureship was established by an endowment that was given to the University of Calgary by Mrs. A.G. Burton in memory of her father, William Lyon Sommerville, who was a distinguished Canadian architect and co-founder of Sommerville, McMurray, and Oxford, which I believe practiced in Ontario. This lectureship brings a visiting practitioner, academic, or critic to SAPL's architecture program every year, and a public lecture for the university and the community it serves in the subject of architecture. And I would like to ask Fraser Burton, who is representing the family tonight, the son of Mary Burton, just to thank him publicly for all of the legacy of what your family has done for our school.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for the coverage. Thank you. It's great.
It was a transformational gift, and it's the gift that keeps on giving every year. So we do have a couple of events coming up for I see a few diehard Design Matters lecture participants. On March the 13th, David Malda is going to join us from Seattle, Washington. He's a design leader at GGN, and his emphasis is on drawing and making throughout the design process. And he's going to share his knowledge around his studio teaching as well as his professional practice. And on April 3rd, we have Gabriela Carrillo, who's going to join us from Mexico City, who is a Mexican architect and partner of the practice Talia Roca and Carrillo. And then, of course, on April the 26th, when it truly will be spring, we have our year-end show, where we transform the entire main floor of our space into a public celebration of student accomplishments in architecture, planning, and landscape architecture. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce Associate Dean Jason Johnson, who will introduce our distinguished speaker. Thank you.
Everybody, happy Valentine's Day. I guess if you brought a date who's not interested in architecture, you know that if they leave with you, it's probably a pretty good sign. Maybe. So welcome everybody, and I'm really pleased tonight to introduce this lecture. This, as John mentioned, this week is a really formative week for many of our students, in that it's an opportunity for them to listen to people besides those of us they have to listen to all the time, and to get sort of some outside voices in their ears and some outside eyes in the work. So I want to thank all of you for having great support tonight's talk. Tonight, Johanna Hurme is going to be speaking. Johanna is a co-founder and managing partner of 5468796 Architecture in Winnipeg. You've seen an increasing quantity of their work here in Calgary, including the platform building, which is just a 5-minute walk from here. In the past 15 years, the firm has received numerous awards and recognitions nationally and internationally. Their work has been published in over 200 books and publications. In 2012, they presented in Canada the Venice Biennale in Architecture, and in 2013, they were selected as the recipient of the Prix de Rome Award in Architecture for Canada by the Canada Council of the Arts. In addition to practice, Johanna is an activist and advocate, having initiated and co-created a number of design-related events and programs. She has taught design at the University of Manitoba, Toronto, Montreal, and in 2019, she was named visiting professor, Morgenstein Chair at the College of Architecture, IIT Chicago. Most recently, she has been invited to teach at Cornell University starting in January 2022. Johanna lectures extensively and is co-author of Innovative Solutions for Creating Sustainable Cities in 2016, and the book she'll be speaking about tonight, Platform Middle, Housing for the 99%. I'd also like to welcome Sasha, who's here as well, and their son, who's hanging out. Probably having seen this lecture a time or two. And if you could all join me in welcoming.
Well, thank you very much, Jason. Thank you very much, Lee Brown, for your kind introductions. Just trying to do a little setup here. Yeah, I'm afraid too, if you brought your Valentine's Day, it's not getting any better for you today, I don't think. But having said that, of course, I'm thrilled to be here and glad to see that some of you made it, regardless of the special day that is today. And it's a bit of a different lecture for me, in a sense that we typically talk mostly through the work that we have done, and today it's more through the lens of the book that you know, just came out in December. Our hope with that of sorry, I was trying to coordinate here what I'm doing. Is it just the arrows? It should be. There, clicker. It's not moving. Oh, there it goes. Oh, it's this one. Okay, so as a means of like really quick introduction, 546 was founded about 16 years ago. We've been working from around a single table in Winnipeg ever since then, and currently around 20 people, all around the idea that we sort of started trying to affect the ambivalence of architecture in Winnipeg, which was pretty, you know, it was a pretty stark situation at the time. There didn't seem to be a lot of interest in the culture of design in the city, and through our work, I guess, and through several other efforts, non-paid efforts, we've been trying to also affect the culture in the city and beyond. But what sort of brings me here today is that in 2019, we were teaching housing at IIT together with Sasha, and actually in our entire team, we're rotating over and we're asked to do a symposium on housing being, of course, you know, one of those things that is constantly spoken about in the media these days, under the label of housing crisis, and how do we actually afford housing for the vast majority of the people who fall outside of the affordability criteria, and what can we do as architects, what's within our toolkit to be able to change those realities. And through the symposium, then we had developers, we had academics, of course, we had fellow architects and city policymakers participate in the symposium to discuss what's truly possible. And after that, the acting dean, a fellow Canadian, Michelangelo Sabatino at the time, asked us to produce a little booklet on the outcomes of the symposium. And what ended up happening is that became this 4-year project for us, where we sort of, instead of producing the booklet, we thought, okay, well, we have a lot more to say about this topic, and we wanted to contribute. And it sort of dragged on, and then finally we got it out this fall, as I mentioned. We've been fortunate, I guess, enough to get into housing very early in our career. So we feel like we've certainly gone through a number of dwelling units in our time, and, you know, currently sort of in the thousands, and thought that, you know, there is something that we should be doing as a profession, really to try to elevate that conversation and try to add our knowledge to the to try to solve some of those problems that are prevalent across the North America anyway, and potentially across the world. So the book currently then is 4 parts, and I just quickly go through it. The first one is the contents of the symposium. The second one is the broader issues that architects don't really get a direct say in, being policy, politics, finance, all of the things that, you know, we can advocate for, but we certainly can't directly through our projects and our, you know, day-to-day tasks to make any difference in, or very little difference in. Micro then is kind of the beef of the book. That's where we're hoping to give a toolkit to students and young architects to try and leapfrog the 16 years that we spent trying to figure out some of these things, or where you can carve room for architecture in, you know, developer-driven environments where most of housing in Canada is produced these days. And then finally, the modeling is more of a catalog. So again, we look at the issues that we're trying to highlight through the lens of our own work, trying to highlight where those so-called tricks of the trade and ideas on how you can carve more room for quality outcomes can come from in your sort of own projects. So they're case studies, or they're something at reference book really for the case studies and discussions in the micro. But before I get into some of those and some projects, we do often talk about this practice ecosystem, which is something that we fully believe in and try to practice sort of day in and day out, which is trying to be more than the design brief or the building brief that we get from clients. And that is whether it's sort of participate in the larger culture of architecture, and that's nothing new to most of you that are in architecture design competitions or exhibitions or activism and whatnot, or writing about important issues or awards and publications, but it's also just really trying to do projects that the general public can get access to and get excited about what design has to offer. Being involved in politics and actually, you know, speaking at City Hall when there's an opportunity, or at the, you know, in my case, Chamber of Commerce in Winnipeg, where, you know, bunch of decision makers come to listen to you is another way to affect outcomes. So anyways, these are some of the components of what we call a practice ecosystem, you know, outside of the actual build work. Some of the examples of those include, you know, inventing as part of the Prix de Rome project conclusion, a table for 1,200 in Winnipeg, which is now a fundraising event that happens every year and includes a table design contest and all kinds of stuff. And head table is always politicians and mayors and policy makers and so forth, so that we do have a voice in the city and that we do have a presence, that the design committee has something to offer. And when there are important issues to be discussed in society in general, that we're invited to that table. Cherry idea, again, trying to activate ordinary folk in the city about their design ideas and putting those on chairs in the city, and then carving out more space for public seating at the same time. Again, not trying to go into detail here, but there's many of these that's actually called the lose your shirt projects, because I always go after them and then we end up, you know, pro bono running around putting walk distance signs in the city, you know, in the middle of the night and whatever else is involved. But somehow through those efforts, I hope that at least, you know, students and people who don't necessarily have the means to start producing architectural projects that are paid can get access to that and can imagine themselves doing things like that. One bucket at a time there, we can see the buckets, was originally at the Metropolis in Mexico City. We reinvented the ordinary painters bucket that the local entrepreneurs, so-called entrepreneurs Vienna, use to claim public space for parking and then charge for it. The police are in on it, and it's sort of a corrupt system. But this way, we sort of built a public, installation of public space that you could walk on, you could hang around and so on. And then at the same time, they returned back to Winnipeg Design Festival the next fall, and we sort of did a fundraiser for an orphanage in Mexico City for a bunch of girls. So it was a way to send the buckets back full to Mexico City. We also do on the board, so a host in our office, design talks among architects, so we can crit each other just like you would do in design studio here in school. So hopefully in the hopes of kind of raising the bar and things like that. But no more about that. Then, you know, obviously exhibitions are one way to try to build that ecosystem, writing about, important issues. So we participated or been co-authors of a few books on compact cities, on housing issues, and then obviously the one that we have here is sort of fully authored by the office. Again, I mentioned being part of sort of political discourse in the city, trying to affect decision makers in what we do. And one opportunity was when I was the chair of the Winnipeg Chamber of Commerce in 2017-18, and proposed to include in all of the luncheons that gather together about 1,200 decision makers in the city every month, to do like 3-minute segment on density, city issues, urban sprawl, whatever, you name it, through the numbers that politicians and business people could understand. And that was sort of a fun venture that is still lots of times talked about, in a way that it felt really gratifying to be able to change things. Of course, we are involved in teaching as in now, and oftentimes try to talk to the students, not to jade them, but try to talk to them about numbers and performance and things like that, that are very much part of our reality in the practice world. And how do we convince our clients to do things that are, out of the box, and we can do only so when we can understand the numbers. And that's sort of part of what we've been trying to get the students to understand. Of course, there's competitions like any sort of ambitious architecture office does. And then we have little small built projects that we funded ourselves that are in an effort to try and give back to the design culture. One would be this guest suite that we have on top of one of our housing projects that, was built as a result of client owing us a bunch of money, and then us being able to take over the stair and elevator core at the top of it and build a little suite there. And now anytime we have an artist or an architecture, personality, either practitioner or somebody who comes in the city to talk, we offer the suite for them to stay free. There's a great view of downtown from there. Secondly, sort of a pop-up kiosk that we funded and is built next to a building that we're owners of, that can act as a sort of a, party box or pop-up exhibition space and so on. Of course, trying to be in the scene, so we understand what else is going on in the world. And then that table of ours often houses other entities, including our clients who are from out of town, or other design entities. Like you have Detox here, we have Storefront in Manitoba, who have temporarily parked themselves there. Architecture Foundation Winnipeg stayed in our office for 12 years. They've just now married themselves to the Manitoba Association of Architects and have left the space, but nevertheless, it's sort of a roundtable where we're hoping that the water cooler kind of conversations make part of that design culture. So then briefly on the symposium itself, here's some of the participants that we had invited originally to that talk about how do we transform housing, how do we think about housing, how do we become part of the discussion. And, the whole bit of it is actually transcribed in the book. There's some real amazing thoughts and nuggets in there that really served as an inspiration to us for the rest of the publication, on, at the really sort of micro level, thinking about housing as a hybrid program to other things, and thinking about it as something that could involve our architectural offices in more sort of intimate way, not just designers, but even as sort of builders, developers. So a full range of things. Again, all in there, but I will really sort of start digging into this sort of at the macro scale. Of course, we have reached a sort of a crisis point now in housing, where we're hearing about it in the media all the time. And the truth of it is, though, that this is only a crisis now all of a sudden for the middle class. It's been a crisis for the lower income folks for ever since the early 70s, where taxation was relaxed in Canada, and where all of a sudden purpose-built housing at mass scale ceased to exist as an option. We stopped building it, and of course all of this has a huge amount to do with the density of our cities, the sustainability of our cities, the environmental impact that we have. And we just think that, you know, it's the answer is somewhere in that mid-scale, isn't necessarily in the high rises, which in North America we do well and we do at a big scale. And it's not necessarily individual house sizes that we also do quite well and is prevalent, but it's sort of in the mid-scale that we don't do and doesn't seem to interest people to live in throughout their lifespan. So when we look at that environmentally, of course, and this is not to guilt anybody, but we do occupy about 4 times the personal square footage in our homes compared to our Asian counterparts, about twice as much as our European counterparts. So as architects, we certainly have a huge responsibility over the environment. I'm sure you've heard this a million times over. And nearly 40% of greenhouse gas emissions come from buildings, and more than a third of global energy consumption comes from buildings. So the profession, the architects, have a huge responsibility over this. What we don't talk about as much is sort of the commodification of housing, and housing being used as a investment vehicle, as a financial instrument. And that too, since that those federal taxation relaxations took place, has really just ramped up at breakneck speed. And so $270 trillion is the value of global real estate, and about 75 of that is private or is in residential housing. So the fact that we are using as an investment tool leaves a lot of space empty, increases the pricing of housing, and sort of deepens the gap between the ones of us who are well off and those who are not. 1 in Canadian households are in poor housing need, means that they're living beyond their means to pay for rent and all of that, or they're not in appropriately sized housing units. But the biggest issue, and the one that I always come back to, is through our research, it is clear to me that it is the percentage of public housing that is absolutely killing us. And we're not going to solve this problem, doesn't matter what the supply line looks like, if we don't increase the percentage of public housing out of all the housing stock that we produce. So it's actually 3.5%, it's going down, of Canada's total housing stock consists of public housing. So how do we serve those that cannot afford housing as it is? We aren't going to meet that demand unless we increase that. In the States, it's slightly worse yet, as you could imagine, perhaps. And you know, then compared to Netherlands or Northern European counterparts of ours, that number is in the mid-30s. So you can just imagine what that difference looks like. Secondly, what shapes the actual form of housing in this part of the world is the fact that, you know, 96.5% of it's produced for profit. It's produced by private developers, no fault of their own. Of course, they're running their businesses, but it is how do we increase the formula to extract most value out of it is what is currently happening. Secondly, we have a dual exit requirement, even for the smallest buildings, 2 stories and up. So it shapes the way that everything is, you know, on a double loaded corridor. We don't have access to natural ventilation and light and so forth. And then thirdly, it is about the lack of public policy for demanding quality in housing. So the types of units that you get as a result of that profit formula are deep and are narrow and have very little window wall typically to be the most profitable that they can be. So essentially, proving this point is that the top version, where you would have more window space along a corridor, is essentially way more expensive than the one at the bottom, where your quality of life potentially reduces the quality of space, or it reduces, but it is the one that is cheaper to produce. So in the micro toolkit, then, what we're trying to do is we're trying to say, well, okay, so this is the framework that we have. This is the framework we have to work with. So what can we do within that as architects, as design professionals, as you know, students and young people entering in the profession? What are the things that are available for us as levers that we could actually prove that, yes, we'll deliver the profits that we need to in this economy? But we can also have some design inventions that carve back that room for design to exist and architecture exist, so that we can still be ambitious about it at, you know, the regular developer, level. And so, again, there are 22 projects in the book to try and sort of look at that through the lens of projects. And what we do also is analyze them through numbers, because when we were young, as we entered the profession, we were schooled by some of these developers, you know, always about, you know, what's the efficiency, you know, what types are you producing, all that stuff. And so it's kind of built in our DNA to look at all of that in terms of numbers. And I guess it's easier to compare some of the projects and whatever merits they may have through that. So the thought is that, you know, you can lay this thing out, you can look at the catalog, you can sort of see where the issues are, you can maybe find some nuggets of inspiration for your own projects as you go through it, and refer back to the catalog as you're flipping through the micro for various strategies that could help out. The way that the toolkit there is organized is the first piece of it is kind of this idea about critical opportunism. And I'm just going to go through one of more recent projects of ours to try to highlight the point. So I guess the point about our invention, this critical opportunism, means that that sometimes we as design professionals have the opportunity to try to create projects and try to go after them, try to put a performance together, try to find the right people to get together, you know, marry the right developer with the right tenant to the right public agency so that they can make a project go. So this is, and it of course touches on a number of other items in the book as well. But so this one is called Pump House, and it is an existing historic pump station that Winnipeg built after the Great Chicago Fire in 18, what is it, Sasha, 18 something or other. I don't even remember, but it was intended to, 19 something? Okay, well, you know, 100 years ago, give or take. And the idea was that as Chicago burned down, this is mostly wood construction, Winnipeg was the same at the time. You know, we had to have a pumping station that pumped water from the river, Red River, and then you could quickly suppress the with that water the fire and not lose the city. The motors and the gears in there were built by the same company as the Titanic motors and whatnot, so it has a huge amount of historic value, even though it was fortunately never needed to be used. But what it became more recently then was sort of a plight of development. It was more of a cost burden to see this project or see this building rehabilitated to anyone than it was a benefit to buy. So the city's development agency, similar to CMLC, was trying to sell it for $1 to developers to try and, you know, do something with it. But they would have to invest the money to make something of it. And it was actually slated for demolition after 17 different attempts or groups trying to look at it and make sense of it. So it's a bit of a horrible brag, but anyway, we looked at the numbers and tried to see what we could do with it. We did have the right, we got lucky in some ways too, but the biggest discovery on it was that everyone had thought that it needed new foundations, this building, because, you know, if you wanted to build on top or if you wanted to add a floor even in the building, you wouldn't need that. But they hadn't looked at the gantry crane that actually existed there, that was there to move and service the motors for the pumps. And it actually had 25 tons? 20 tons of capacity. And we thought, okay, well, if that already exists, then, you know, we could use that and convince our structural engineer to look at it in that view, and then realize that you can actually make sense of it. You can sling a floor in it and still be able to, be able to turn it into a revenue positive project rather than one that would suck all your resources from the project. And secondly, there was a development site on the same plot or the same title, 100 feet in the back, that was well understood and used for housing and various other tests. But there was a 40-footer in front of it facing our waterfront drive that nobody had considered. Like they thought, well, it's too small to do anything with. And then, you know, so the project really just became, you know, one single loaded housing project in the front, 6-story maximum, so it can be built out of wood, so save some money there. And through these various things that I'll just go through, we were able to prove that this together as a project was viable. And then we found the developer who was willing to come there, so 15,000 square feet of commercial space, and these 3 sort of super simple modular blocks of housing, about 100 housing units as a result of that. A little bit of underground parking on the backside of that larger plot, and a bunch of commercial space marked in the yellow there. And then 15,000 square feet or so of office space for a tenant that we also found for them, and then a restaurant on the ground level amongst and within the pumps themselves. So I guess those are sort of the components of the project that really made it viable. It's a deep plate within the pump house proper, and so we also got some skylights into it as sort of a last a real move to be able to again make it viable. And then you can see sort of the project components now. It's just been completed in sort of December. I think we got occupancy for the last block of it, and people have it's 100% occupied at the moment. So the units went right away, and the pumps were preserved. So previous iterations, it wasn't clear how they were going to be able to do that. People were typically trying to put the floor lower so that you would have to remove the pumps, but now they're sort of just preserved under there, and they're visible from every part of the commercial floor space that's in there. And again, as I mentioned originally, was I guess branding agencies that had the first lease in the building and occupied it for about 5 years, until just now it's in new hands, but still functioning as an office space. The restaurant is in the corner near where it says 7, within the pump house property. So when you go there, the restaurant's called Pump House, you can actually view all of the super cool gears and things that are in there, which of course is pretty cool. But the other part about it is this sort of like, I don't know, we call practical innovation, is trying to always find ways to make projects go for cheaper and somehow off-the-shelf materials. And this would be one example where, because of the sort of industrial nature of the pump building, we thought that we can use just ordinary studs, so steel studs, as glass mullions for interior glazed partitions, instead of some sort of proprietary system that's typically quite a bit more expensive. And funny enough, we spec'd actually the studs that have no holes for electrical runs and so on, but got these, and in the end we're happy about it because it actually really shows you what the studs are. But also what happened is that we were able to squeeze the formula further, was that we placed these 2 foot on the center, as opposed to typically you would want to max out the glass and get 4 feet or something. So this allowed us to go from a 1/4 inch glass to 1/2 inch glass, essentially saving 50% of the glass. And then, we're able to go from 1/2 inch glass to 1/4 inch glass and save 50% of the cost and weight of it. So now guys that this developer in particular like to hire is, off of Kijiji kind of unskilled labor, was able to put it together because they could maneuver these pieces of glass. They're still tempered, so there's not extras there. And at the base there is a channel and a cap to just hold it in place. And then all we did as a custom piece was the base shoe that kind of hangs over the floor plate. Secondly, there is 2 pieces of regular metal decking that acts as flutes for ducting air around below the floor. So we just poured concrete on that, and it's sort of rough and ready, good to go environment. It's already been replicated a couple of times actually in the city as a detail because of its sort of, I think the industrial nature, and the cost of the renovation of that space was $45 a square foot, which is, I don't know if you're an architect out there that knows, but that is really, really low cost. There are other components of the project that are trying to give back to the city, including the sort of leisure space that gets left over from the underground parking ramp. And hopefully you'll see some pictures shortly of that. There's sort of a plaza that's in front of the restaurant and in front of the commercial space that's under the front building, the smaller nugget. And then I'll get to in a minute, sort of trying to make sense of that single loaded building piece in the front. But these are the sort of urban spaces, and again, photographed in the winter when it's Winnipeg. So not terribly vibrant, but there were kids actually playing. Kids are like guys playing something.
Snoring.
Oh, it was a play, okay, so snow removal, but anyway, so they're not staged in that sense. And then what we do though often, again, when we think about the efficiency formula and we think about the numbers, is we put exterior passageways, exterior corridors on projects. Which is, throws some people off, but you'll see more about that in a minute. There's a barber shop in the front now, the restaurant's to the left of on the screen there. And it's actually a pretty cool little vibrant little space with those tenants in place. So when it comes to the housing, we used the 15-foot wide module that got created with, I don't know if I have that, but nail laminated timber floors, so 2x6s, essentially spanning across the 15 feet, nailed together as a solid deck, and then put concrete on top of that, so the bottom of it could be left exposed, and you can see the wood inside the units. Single span, no beams required as a result of that. And then the units are about 40 feet deep, but again, on the front, they're single loaded corridor, and on the back, it's double loaded, but still exterior. And the benefits of that are, some of the things that we talk about in the book. So we are using something called skip stop corridor. If you're familiar with that term, this means that every second floor is accessed via stairs, and every second one is flat from level from the where your elevator brought you up to. And it saves half of the corridors, half of the airspace that we can't rent or sell anyway. And then the fact that there are also, so you can see some of the suites. So the idea is that, the flat entry, you're at the bottom there, you're going right into the suite as a sort of a typical scenario. And then on the skip level, you're actually arriving stairs up to the suite. And that allows us one, extra benefit, which is the fact that you are, there's Indian or his buddy in the suite, sort of giving you a sense of what that looks like. But that combined with the sort of exterior passageways gives you the option of being able to ventilate it naturally. He bought me flowers today because Valentine's Day, so very proud of it. And then get the benefit of being able to do a 3-unit and have a bedroom that has, you can narrow the unit that way, but still have natural light and insulation. And then our thought is that hopefully this gets inhabited more too when time goes on, and people can bring chairs and personal items into that, so that hopefully we'll start to see more life in there. And then the exiting, as I said, the exterior corridor is what creates the simple mass, some formal play. And we use just simple corrugated perforated metal to span from the bottom of the stairs to the top of the guard elsewhere. And it's I think this is, it's not, yeah, I have a PDF, it's not playing. Shoot, I had a video, oh well. Anyway, so that you can see how the corridors, bring people outside, and weirdly enough, it was just, the first part was built right before COVID, and so somehow, because of the exterior corridor nature, people were more comfortable sharing that space with their neighbors when it was outside. And so all the sort of doubters who said it's never going to work and definitely never going to work in Winnipeg, were actually sort of proven wrong in that sense of it anyway. And I told my students too that it's no different than going to your house. It has a front door to the outside, so what are we really kind of afraid of? The video is playing on my own computer here, but yeah, the thing is a PDF, so it's not gonna shoot. All right, too bad. Anyway, so back to that. So now it's the 3 blocks, and it's the sort of the urban space in between. And sorry, I'm trying to catch up. And there's a view to the river. So the sort of shotgun units are all facing river on the front. And you can see the mill deck, the nail laminated timber ceilings, giving some warmth and glow to the project. So then moving on, what kind of time do I have for this, by the way? How are we doing on time? Still good? All right, so given that we're in Calgary, I wanted to share this quickly. Again, you're probably familiar with the building, but maybe not familiar with all the sort of design intricacies in it or where it came from. So we were tasked by the CMLC as design architects working together with Kasian to design a 510 stall parkade, which according to the Calgary Parking Authority, which I was really impressed at the time, was going to be the last parkade that they'll ever build. Acknowledging the idea that car ownership is going to go down. It was actually, we drove less for the first time since the invention of car, I think 2015 or 14, something like that. And so the hope is that the new generation will see a different way to move about in the city. But I see a few smiles, so maybe that's not entirely true. So anyway, the site was really long. I forget the actual dimensions of it. And of course, it was cut through by the LRT that goes underground at the site on 9th Avenue. And you know, it goes under the library and then leaks into the site of the current parkade. And this was essentially going to, you couldn't put any foundation in there, so it was going to split the project in half. The idea originally was that we were going to build that 510 car garage on one side, and then on the other side would be a future development pad. But as we were analyzing the project and trying to figure out what to do with it, we sort of thought that we can actually add 20% buildable area to the site if we span across it and leave those future development paths to the ends of the current site and build the parkade in the middle. The other benefit of this was that we would have to have ended up going to about 10 stories, even 12 stories of parking if it was going to be squeezed into one side or the other, which would add enormous amount of ramps that wouldn't necessarily be usable for the parking. It was too tight, so you would lose that space. And then those ramps also would make it so that it wouldn't be easily convertible to other uses in the future. So you can see sort of the final configuration, the future development paths. But then as we sort of knew that we could stretch the project across, we realized that we can do it at 1%, and we can do a continuous floor plate that wraps around a central courtyard that could then perhaps lend itself to other uses, could be converted to something else where you have access to natural light. You don't have the typical parkade depth that you would, that's not doesn't lend itself to housing or according to current standards to sort of natural light even in office buildings. So it ended up being only 40 feet wide, so single loaded system. But the benefit outweighed that to be able to sort of also convert it in perhaps stages from the top down, and to be able to sort of determine how much you needed at any given time. The fact that you would need a topping anyway allowed us to deal with the 1% slope. So in a sort of rough office space, you could see that floor being just fine. When you get to housing, you would need to add that topping anyway, but the corridor would remain on the 1% slope. So that's how it was configured. So it can be completely converted. Similarly, well, I'll just show you here. This is from another kind of project of ours, sort of some of the interior, which was sort of an industrial take too. So this is scaffolding that creates the infrastructure on the inside and trying to similarly be convertible to other ways of using it. And then halfway through the project, we got the requirement of putting platform innovation center into it. So there's about 50,000 square feet of enclosed space in there. So that ended up being on the first and second floor, and the only piece of the parkade that cannot be reused in case the parking function is gone would be that central ramp that takes you past the platform center. And here's some of the speculation if you were to convert it to an office and sort of the rough unit plans of converting it into housing in the future. So it was built with all that in mind. And of course, we got a little bit more structural loading that was built in. So there's about a 20% upcharge for all the things that we did, and a higher floor-to-floor ceiling that would typically be in a arcade. And oopsie, sorry. So there we go. That's sort of the central ramp, and then if that's removed, then that courtyard is more light filled, of course. We worked pretty hard, or Sasha mainly worked pretty hard to try and get all the mechanical and sprinkler lines and such hidden. And so the parquet actually is a pretty pure sort of concrete form now. And the undulation of the aluminum recycled and recyclable facade, the idea is that will become balconies in the future, and then your envelope that we couldn't build for the parquet at this stage wouldn't be wasted, but it would just be built a little bit further in the project. And of course, there are a few other uses in there. There's basketball courts, and there's some bikes, and I don't know if the cafe is active. I didn't have a chance. It is. I have a chance to go by yet this week, but to our thrill, of course, it's been very much seemed to have been loved by the car enthusiasts. It as a sort of a photo op structure for their cars for the meantime. So there you go. But the idea being that because it's above ground, because it has higher floor to floor, because we invested a little bit more onto the structural loading and because of that, 1% being able to do this in stages, it does lend itself to future, it's future resilient, I suppose, that it's not going to be wasted money if in fact we get less driving in Calgary, which I hope will happen someday. Anyway, and so then, God, this is taking me a long time for some reason. But anyway, I've been preaching to my students about spaces in between, which we think makes multifamily housing possible and more acceptable, I guess, for a bigger population. So it's not just for students and it's not just for seniors to live in multifamily, but when you have a yard space, when you have a communal shared outdoor space with your neighbors, is the way that I grew up. You have lifelong relationships, you forge, friendships, and you have community activities, you have shared barbecues, you have seniors watching kids play, you have leaf raking bees and things that happen in other neighborhoods. So why can't we have this in multifamily? It sort of became pretty clear. I'm number 3 there in the skiing sort of competition that our yard held. When I was thinking about it for like a picture presentation like 10 years ago, and I was trying to think of like what was different and what was I missing in North America compared to home. And I realized it's a yard space. And we actually said in our language in Finnish, we said, I'm from this yard, as opposed to I'm from these buildings. And so it places a different kind of a value on how we think about collective space. And this is a comparison. There's an aerial of Helsinki and how the yards typically were. And then there's the first place that I lived in Winnipeg, where, in the same space is occupied by a parking lot and a garbage enclosure. And so how do we ask people with families and people who want to enjoy that collective space to live here? And if we're not doing a better job in doing this space. So in our minds, then it's about the way that we understand, and stumpy is a term that's used for the five-story concrete base, 4 stories of wood frame, stick frame housing, about 5 to 6. Anyway, so the American city grid considers, park a separate entity from the other buildings, whereas, in our, where we grew up context, it's part of every city block, whether it's urban or it's suburban. And that network within the city is what we sort of keep desiring, what we think is a prerequisite for us to be able to convince more people to live in a multifamily scenario. And then we have a bunch of these little things that, again, as a student, when you're designing housing, as a young professional, when you're going out there and designing, that you could deploy in your own project, just to squeeze a little bit more out of the formula and be able to invest it back into more ambitious architecture. That's the whole. This is block 10. It's a 10-unit condo project in a sort of a former gas station site and just outside of the very core of the city. We got this project with the zoning already given to us. And, it's about trying to innovate on the zoning envelope that was 100 feet wide, 80 with setbacks. And how do we have true townhome units in it? Otherwise, that 10 would end up, the math is such that it would end up being 8 feet wide. And so in this case, we, instead of dividing it sort of vertically, we divided it into 30 blocks, and each unit got 3 blocks on various sides of the building, connected by central private stair that you know, they kind of nestled among one another. And the developer also wanted to do it as a white box, so that having those clear blocks allowed them to put with plumbing on the center and all the mechanical connections there, allowed them to do whatever they wanted with the suites. And so the funny outcome of this, of course, sorry, let me go back one, is that we ended up with 8 corner units as opposed to 4, and so the realtor was really, really happy. Anyway, even though they couldn't figure out which unit was which for the longest time. Slightly larger scale, so going up to 7 stories now. This is OS condos. So 25 units, more in the upper scale. This was still where condos were something you could build, and the market was demanding. It's been since saturated, and we're back to all rental housing, where we do housing. But the point here is, again, like when you think about that efficiency, you have 85% you need to hit. There are a couple of ways to do that. Of course, 3-story walk up is a no-brainer. That's 100% efficient. There's no corridor that you can't sell or rent out. But even in a building like this, you have town houses at the base, and you do a skip stop corridor, you do a couple of mezzanines, and you can go from, you know, the typical 85% efficiency to over 90% in this case. And again, invest that back into the project. 90 Alexander is a 210 unit rental housing project that was done in collaboration with Brownsburg, actually, or from here in Calgary, their first venture to Winnipeg. And this was just completed. It's gotten occupancy, like full occupancy, I think this month. And it consisted of historic 4-story brick building, as you can see there, that was preserved. And then the snake of a block that houses the rest of the suites. I think, you know, I can see that there's a courtyard. We're trying to keep to our idea that, you know, courtyards are and place and green spaces are in the project, whether we're asked to do them or not, squeeze them in. And then there are townhomes that are opening onto that courtyard. We also have a bit of a mews or alleyway next to the historic building that has a nice sort of an urban scale. But anyway, the point of this particular one is that there's sort of flexibility is one of the challenges that we often hear about. And in this case, it's a short-term flexibility that Brownsburg didn't at the time know, because they weren't familiar with the market, whether they should do more 1-bedroom suites or more 2-bedroom suites, or what the right ratio was and what the uptake would be. And so we tried to design a system where that could be flexible all the way up into construction. So we had 1 bed, 3 1-beds that sort of equal the size of 2 2-beds. And they kept flipping this around up until the very end to the probably project architect there pulled her hair out a few times as a result of it. Other kind of flexibility, one of the first projects that Sasha and I did together under Fullmeyer Architects was still our former employer, but we were the design team, is like an urban condominium. Okay. Well, anyway, 8 units, townhomes right in the inner city. But instead of doing the 8 units, we had 7 sort of standards home units, and then 4 flex spaces that were on their own title. So you could sell them separately. You could combine them with the units. You could have a lower entry price to your suite. So I think it was 129,000 for the 800 square foot unit at the time. Now, given this is 2005, but still it was pretty cheap. And then, you know, these things ended up being used as many different ways as we thought they should. Yeah. So as a studio, as a sort of extension of the suite and all of those various things, there was accounting office and so on. And I'm nearly there. Hang with me for another 5 minutes. This is another project, 62M, sort of the round pie shape in the sky. It didn't start as that, but it was really based on the efficiency of the corridor space versus the exterior perimeter that you get as a result. Has 40 units that are equal size, pies in the sky, so to speak. And then, so what do you do when that's the condition, where you have deep units, either because you're designing in an existing floor plate, existing building, or because of weird conditions like this that you are sort of dealt with. An idea here is that you know, that utility space that would be at the back of a unit gets squeezed down to 7 feet, and at the frontage, you have about 22 feet of access to window, and then sort of various ways of being flexible within that beneficial. Another project here in Calgary hasn't gone off the ground, but has been designed mid-block scenario. So how, you know, I think this was 84 units or something like that, 2 beds, 1 beds, garage directly under it for 2 levels. But here we're trying to figure out how do you get a sort of a multi-aspect, like, you know, with the deep unit, so that it isn't just the window at the front. And we made everything else super simple, 20-foot grid. But at the back of each of these blocks, there would be a continuous light well, typical sort of thing that you would see in old housing from the turn of the century, or, you know, 100 years ago. That allows you that extra ventilation, and your 2-bedroom units are actually 360 degrees, like you have windows on 4 sides, right? And even the 1 bed gets an extra ventilation point through the light bulb. So other benefits, the cross ventilation, natural light, all of that comes with it. And then something called systems thinking, where we're just trying to think about how does architecture, structure, mechanical, electrical all work together in sync. This was an early, you know, 30 units or something, give or take, hollow core based, but stick framing. So hollow core floors and stick framing otherwise had a sort of an oasis or a biosphere in the center. We could reduce having catch basins and so on. But the main thing was that hollow core plank, the 4-foot span of the hollow core plank was used as a sort of an architectural module as well. And then when we removed one, we could fit a stair that's 3 feet and a mechanical shaft that was 1 foot, and everything plugged onto that mechanical shaft. And then the hollow cores themselves were used as flutes. So we cut down ducting, and they were used as to deliver warm air to the perimeter. Cooling was handled with the ductless split on the base of that mechanical shaft. And then finally, just on comment on housing and how it tends to always be something where we see things line up for the reason of rationalizing mechanical runs, rationalizing electrical runs, keeping costs down, keeping it buildable, but also results in a very sort of expected outcome. And so we've always been interested in trying to see if we can shift that without compromising that simplicity of build. And there's a various sort of examples, again, in the book on where we can do that by either aligning plumbing, but flipping the units within that, or again, freeing that using just, you know, living room space to be able to punch windows in various spots and things like that. But it's actually surprisingly sort of tricky to get there. And then how you mask that, how you mask the sort of the units being, again, in this case, we're flipping the suite, but then also trying to sort of through these various fins to try and give additional play to the facade. So that's that. Again, a different talk in a way that not a bunch of projects, but again, our hope with the book is that it's sort of a monograph or anything, but it's really a toolkit. We want to share the knowledge so somebody else can use it and build on it and do better and make better projects in the future for the benefit of us all. And of course, we do that because we do believe that housing isn't a commodity, but it is a human right, and the architectural profession should work towards that. Thank you very much for listening. Yeah, of course, yeah.
But I think we have time for a few questions. Okay, and I got a speaker right away.
It's getting morning.
Hi. Thank you so much for the presentation. I'm currently working with affordable housing in Calgary. My question is more related to that. If you have any examples whatsoever or any takes on how to produce affordable housing that builds the leaders high quality time. What's your take on that, and have you done any of that kind of work? Yeah, share some takeaways from that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. We are currently working with housing, Calgary Housing on a project in Bundle, so north end of the city. And, I would say that compared to other jurisdictions that I'm familiar with, they're actually quite informed and have the right sort of attitude towards what they're trying to do, but suffer, of course, from the sort of conditional issues that surround us all when it comes to like, again, policy finance, all those different pieces that I was trying to touch on. But it has been, I think, I mean, you'll have to be the judge more than us at the end and see how it worked out. But, I just do believe that there should be, again, where else it's gonna come from, but it's gonna come from the sort of, public authorities, that money that we should invest in the public housing. I do appreciate the fact that they're, often combining, programs these days, and, you know, like John Ronan was one of our symposium participants, did a library with housing, City of Calgary's done that. I think that's, you know, part of the success, but it just doesn't happen enough. We don't invest in it. So to me, my biggest beef with this whole system in Canada is the fact that, you know, 3.5%, what is that? And it was, our production was about 20% of total housing stock got produced. In the early 70s, it was 20%, and it's now 1% of the total new production, right? So I don't know how else we can fix it. We can only, it feels like drops in the bucket, even if you have a good housing agency in the city. And one further comment on that, the current federal housing funds that are available, if you look at Calgary, it's absolutely ridiculous because you can get the support through the system, the MLI program. If you are 30% less than the median household income in Calgary, you want to venture a guess how much that is for an affordable suite? My students know. $1,738. So that's not affordable for anybody. And that's for like a shoebox size unit. Like they don't specify what it needs to be. And even in Winnipeg, that number is considerably lower. It's $1,100 a month. But it leaves, according to our calculations, at least a quarter of the population outside of that affordability criteria. So what we're doing is putting federal money, you know, aligning the pockets of the developers further. And also they only have a 10-year commitment that they need to make for that affordability level. So this is not going to go anywhere unless we are really willing to look at the true issues for at least the bottom quarter of the economic pyramid.
More questions?
Thank you again for the presentation. I guess I wanted to ask you a little bit about how your office handles, I guess, like value engineering and like pushback from clients and developers.
Yeah, obviously in the minds of all architects, but I think what we're trying to do as a result of it, and we're victims to this also, of course, it's not always perfect, but is trying to make the project proposal so that everything that we think is really valuable from a perspective of the architecture is built in, it's baked into the formula. So it isn't, you know, like not tacking on a canopy, let's say, for the sake of example, that can be shaved down later and said, we don't need that. So every decision that's important in the project is sort of like, you can't do the project without it. And that's how we usually try to do that. But you can certainly only have 1 to 3 of those, maybe those items, and everything else is always on, you know, is always in danger of getting shaved off. But then you try to fight that with innovation, right? You try to provide options that are same cost as off the shelf stuff, or you're trying to find some savings somewhere else. Like I was trying to save on efficiency and sometimes being able to add units and give them a better outcome so that they'd be willing to put that money back in. But of course, what happens sometimes is that then, you know, they see that, okay, well, I can take that money and then I can just give it to my investors or whatever. So that hopefully happens less, but it is a hard battle, absolutely. But the first option there, I think, is the best tool to fight that. Yeah. Oh, I guess one more is the Sasha in particular is very good at this. Is having a huge amount of energy and tiring them out. Going back with another proposal, another proposal, we actually renamed value engineering to value architecture. So that's what we tried to do.
Thank you for this, and first off, massive impressed by the platform project and the forward thinking. I advise clients on a daily basis on managing infrastructure and getting ready for transition. This is next level preparation. So congratulations on that. Going back to your first slides about greenhouse gas emissions and then seeing the increased livability through all the exposed windows and light. Have the modern materials allowed you to get more energy efficient next year, or is the trade-off simply that we are spending more energy to have these more livable houses? Where's your balance there?
Well, we obviously have to comply to the energy codes that are getting more stringent, and I think that's why we have to understand these days more than ever that it isn't about just putting curtain glass or curtain wall on buildings like we're used to doing in Vancouver and many sort of towers and other things. So that you know, so the arts of, I don't know, posing window facades or whatnot becomes more that. Yeah, and so Sasha's is pointing out that the pump house project that had the glass face on one side is 27% glazing only, because the side walls are solid, and then on the other side, sorry. So there's small bedroom windows on the other sides of those, but so it's balanced out for the overall project, right? I don't know if that helps, but yes.
No, I wasn't expecting a clear if this way or this way. I was just expecting.
Yeah.
I wanted that kind of insight into your decision making, how you balance that in. Thank you.
Yeah, and then I think that the one thing that I would add is that we have done things like we've looked at the triple pane window, and then the trade-off, obviously tried to get triple pane windows whenever possible, but sometimes like in a super cheap project, we've done something where we call it the double pane, but we set it further in through the brick mold and actually sort of a cowling around it. And the wind shear on that is equivalent because it's set in, it's not as bad. And so you can actually get rid of that one pane, save that cost, and still get the same energy performance out of it. So there are sort of various things within that you can think about, but you have to dig deep, I think, and work with manufacturers to get there.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody, and I think your son is setting up for the next lecture.
Yeah.
So we'll be ready for his slides here soon. I noticed we have some books here as well. So I'm not sure what the status of that is or how someone can get a hint one of those, but maybe.
Yeah, I will just say that quickly. So if one of my students was kind enough to find me for I can get up to my square, and I have 20 books that I've logged here if anyone's interested. We have a student price, 57.14. I don't know who set this up. It wasn't me. And then obviously you have to pay the shipping costs, which is, across Canada, $20. So yeah, good deal today. Anyway, thank you so much for coming. Thanks for your interest. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody.